Well, lots of things are happening right now on a global scale that you desperately need to be aware of. You see, while you and I, the American people, are being distracted with our midterm election taking days on end to get our results, well, the World Economic Forum decided to seize up this election opportunity in America to go ahead and have their annual COP27 event. This time they held it in Egypt. Now, at this event, global leaders from all across the world, your top 1%ers, your billionaires and trillionaires and mega corporations and people who are sporadic in U.S. government, leaders all over the globe decided to gather at this annual event in order to decide the fate of humanity. And you guys are going to be chilled to your very core about what they discussed and what they intend to do. And by the way, they intend to do it regardless of who is running the country here in the United States of America. In other words, regardless of our U.S. midterm results. And how do they get away with that? Well, because the mega corporations plan on igniting their plutocracy, right? A world ruled by the rich and powerful, the 1%. So let's dive into what these globalists are conniving behind the scenes while you and I, the American people, are distracted by our United States midterm election. For starters, let's just throw out a reminder that the World Economic Forum has already told us that you will own nothing and be happy. Take a look at this reminder on Forbes.com. Welcome to 2030. I own nothing, have no privacy, and life has never been better. And you can see World Economic Forum is the contributor, and that was back from 2016. Anyhow, they have since wiped all of that, kind of cleaned off the slate because, well, quite frankly, a lot of people didn't take well to that. They want their privacy and they want to own things, and the World Economic Forum wants to take this away. No thanks. But that's just your first reminder of one of their ultimate agendas. Now, right now, they are discussing things like owning nothing and your privacy at these World Economic Forum annual events. Right now, we have world leaders and world mega corporation leaders from all over the globe attending COP27 over in Egypt. Well, one of our leaders, his name is John Kerry. You guys are all familiar with him. He is over at this event, and there he is talking about how, well, we should roll out climate strategy like we did the COVID vaccine. Take a look at what I'm talking about. This is on Breitbart.com. John Kerry says climate strategy modeled on COVID vaccine rollout at World Economic Forum panel. Now, here's what he states. The World Economic Forum's First Movers Coalition climate change agenda was modeled off the effort to roll out vaccines during the Chinese coronavirus crisis, John Kerry said at COP27 panel in Egypt on Tuesday. Appearing alongside the World Economic Forum president and various corporate executives, U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, John Kerry, said that it's urgent for the private sector to pair with governments to realize the goal of preventing the global temperatures from rising and to save lives in allegedly the looming global crisis. Here's what he actually stated, and I quote, "We have an enormous challenge before us to bring to scale new technologies and to harness the deeply capable capacity of private sector entrepreneurs, aka millionaires and billionaires, in order to bring them to the table, because without it, no government has enough money. We need everybody behind this," Kerry said in a speech before the panel. He goes on, "The idea behind the launch of the First Movers Coalition is pretty straightforward. We need to create demand signals in the market where they didn't exist, which takes boldness, it takes courage from these executives who have made the decision to be part of this." So I'm going to hit the pause button right there because it's very important. What he says in that particular statement, he says, we're going to create demand where it doesn't exist. And he says these big corporate executives are going to do it for us. In other words, we don't need the U.S. government. We don't need anybody else, because corporate America and corporate Egypt or wherever, whatever country you're in, big 1%ers are leading the way. And they're going to make you think you need something you may or may not need. Create demand where demand doesn't exist. In other words, we're going to create demand for crickets and bugs, even though the demand from people doesn't exist. We're going to create a demand for solar power and wind power where the demand doesn't exist, even though solar and wind is not sufficient enough to power our country here in America. But we're still going to make that demand exist. We're going to also create a demand for things like lab-grown meat where demand doesn't exist. That's exactly the kind of things that he's talking about here. But he goes on to expand in that article there, and he says this: we modeled it somewhat on the experience on what happened with vaccines. The government said, we're going to pay for it, you build it. The same thing with SpaceX. If you build it, we're going to use it, and we'll pay for it. Wow, that sounds a lot like a plutocracy. I'll get into that to a moment. People who were putting capital at risk knew that they could get a return on that capital, or at least cover their expenses in case of something like vaccines, where human life was so at risk. Well, human life is at risk now in the context of the challenges of the global climate crisis, Kerry warned, and he concludes, and most of what we are doing cannot be changed by anyone else who comes along. The marketplace has made its decisions to do what we need to do to respond to the climate crisis. In other words, nobody's going to change our minds. You can't do anything about it. This is what we are going to do. And these big corporations are in charge of it, and they're going to kick it off. You know what that's called? A plutocracy. Let me throw this up there. I know some of you know what it is, but for liberals listening, a plutocracy is a society that is ruled or controlled by people of great wealth or income, like those at the World Economic Forum, right? The first known use of the term dates back to 1631, but that's a plutocracy. It's kind of mixed, I would say, with an authoritarian government, where basically an authoritarian government is a government that holds power and makes policies without the consent of the people and the rule. It's kind of like a mix between those two, because we've got the people at the World Economic Forum saying, screw the government, we don't need you. We're going to do what we need to do through our movement here at COP2. And the U.S. government saying, yeah, fine, we'll fund it, we'll pay for it, just tell us what to do. Really? Where's our vote? Where's our say? You know, by the way, everybody's well aware of this. We have no say in the World Economic Forum, zero. We have no say at organizations like United Nations. They decide you shut your mouth and you shut the F up. That's what this organization is. And speaking of that First Movers Coalition that John Kerry was talking about, let me show you here. He talks about this First Movers Coalition movement, he says, was needed to create demand signals in the marketplace where they didn't exist. That's the purpose of this entire First Movers Coalition, right? And here it is, First Movers Coalition. This is on the worldeconomicforum.org website. And here's kind of the breakdown. You can see some of the CEOs who are involved in this, and their entire plan is to get us by net zero, which, by the way, would crumble our entire economic society. But it goes on to talk about what they're about. The First Movers Coalition is a global initiative harnessing the purchasing power of companies to decarbonize 7 hard-to-abate industrial sectors that currently account for 30% of global emissions: aluminum, aviation, chemicals, concrete, shipping, steel, and trucking, along with innovation, carbon removal technologies. The 50-plus companies who make up this coalition seek to send a powerful market signal to commercialize zero carbon technologies. Then they go on to admit something very, very important, and I want you to see this on the First Movers Coalition. The FMC is proud to have 65 members from top global corporations. In other words, top global corporations, your one percenters, are deciding the fate of a lot of what our companies and groups are going to do here in the United States of America. Again, a plutocracy. You know, meanwhile, they're crapping on our capitalism and selling us socialism and communism in an entirely different package. And they're literally calling socialism and communism capitalism when it's not. But we have world leaders all over the world, including right here in America, bashing on capitalism. Take a look here. This is on technocracy.news. Kerry, Podesta, and Macron, technocrats who are openly hostile toward capitalism. As a reminder, here's what Macron said at Davos. Davos Great Reset. French President Macron declares modern capitalism can no longer work. That was back in 2021. By the way, then we also have Greta Thunberg. Yes, I butchered that on purpose because she is a thorn in our side. But Greta Thunberg shunned COP27 and literally has called for an overthrow of the whole capitalist system. What does she suggest instead? How about something more comparable to communism and socialism? Oh, by the way, Pope Francis is also calling for a new system. Pope Francis calls for a new economic system that sounds a whole lot like what we're trying to get rid of here in America, the ESG, the Environment Social Governance Score, which I've warned about here on my channel, especially. I've been warning about ESG on Restricted Republic for quite some time. By the way, if you're not there, get there. I cannot even tell you why it is so important to get to these alternative sites, especially in light of all the devastation that is going on. We've been covering a lot of the election there on Restricted Republic, and right now you can get it for $5 per month. Use the coupon code Trump. We've got some very important reports that you need to see on there, and all the content comes commercial free, but get to restrictedrepublic.com. But anyhow, they're attempting to get rid of capitalism. This is why they're teaching things like critical race theory in our schools here in America. And that's because they want to sell people the idea that capitalism is bad. And yes, of course, I don't want crony capitalism. That exists. But what we have now is far better than anything socialism or communism is going to bring us. Meanwhile, we have, on another aspect, the United Nations right now is telling rich countries to fork up trillions of dollars to spread the wealth around, again, aka socialism, to the poorer countries. And they need it now for climate justice. Take a look at Breitbart. This is just another global organization messing with our society. United Nations tells rich countries to pay $2 trillion a year for climate justice. Then we also have this here. The first $1 trillion alone should come from rich countries, investors, and multilateral development banks, declared the analysis commissioned by Britain and Egypt hosts, respectively, of the 2021 UN Climate Summit in Glasgow and this week's COP27 event in Egypt. A further $1.4 trillion must then originate domestically from private and public sources, says the report seen by the AFP. Now, not only that, we've got Pakistan weighing in all this. Here we have Breitbart. Prime Minister Sunak opens door to climate reparations for Pakistan and other third world governments. Yes, you heard that right. The prime minister there in Pakistan is saying, hey, give us money, reparations, we deserve it. Give it, give it, give it, give it. As if them and their government don't have enough money to begin with. I mean, this is insane. Meanwhile, you want to know what else they're doing at COP27 to kind of get back on that bandwagon? They're planning on, the United Nations Food Agency wants to control our farming. Why? He who controls the food controls it all. Kissinger talked about that in a few reports, and here we go. COP27, and this is on Reuters, right? COP27, United Nations Food Agency plan on farming emissions to launch by next year after the investors push for this. It goes on, the UN Food Agency aims to launch a plan within the year to make the world food system more sustainable. A senior executive told Reuters on the sidelines of the COP climate talks in Egypt. The plan would show how the food industry and farming can align with the world's goal of capping global warming at 1.5 degrees Celsius. Food and Agricultural Organization's Deputy Director Olda Dada said, I'm not even going to try to state that name. It says more than 40 investors managing a combined $18 trillion, there's your 1%ers, urged the FAO in June to create a plan to curb emissions in the sector, often overlooked in global warming debates, yet one of the biggest sources of climate damaging emissions. It goes on that investors are hoping the roadmap will provide guidance on matters such as methane emission limits and support to ensure a just transition for farmers, said Jeremy Kohler, chair of the FAIRR initiative and organizers of the investor-led campaign. Now, let me just hit the pause button right there, because what they're stating in this particular report is, hey, let's do things more like, the fertilizer ban that they did in Sri Lanka. And in case you're unaware here, that is, fertilizer ban decimates Sri Lanka crops as government popularity basically flows down, ebb and flows. But here we have over in Sri Lanka, they said, we're going to ban fertilizer. And they got a big thumbs up from the World Economic Forum and the United Nations. And then their entire country fell apart. Protests happened. They ran out their leaders. Ran their leaders out of their homes because the people were starving due to such a ban. This is what the 1%ers want. Well, I don't know. about you, but I definitely don't want that here in the United States of America. The World Economic Forum and the United Nations are calling for things like treat climate like COVID. They're also saying no more capitalism, get rid of that. Let's embrace what they're calling a different name of capitalism. Corporate, I forget the term off of the top of my head, but basically it's socialism and communism in a nice new package. They're saying give us all of your money so we can spread the wealth around, right? And they're saying, and let's put all these stipulations on your food supply so we can end up like Sri Lanka. No, thank you. No, thank you. And just as a quick reminder, the World Economic Forum wants to remind you that by the year 2020, you're going to be happy when you own nothing and have no privacy. Welcome. Welcome to the international plutocracy that they want to implement, where the richest of the rich control the cards. Isn't it interesting when you look back at everything, how much these millionaires and billionaires like Gates and Soros control so much of what's going on and how they got so much power during the COVID era? Ever question that?